the river and fetch back my water. No, Adaugo. Please, the spirits won't spare me and my child.
The clay pot shook, in Nwanyuoma's trembling hands. Adaugo's voice cut through the burning afternoon air. Go to the stream, she hissed. Bring back my water. Now, Nwanyuoma fell to her knees, her pregnant belly heavy, her voice breaking. You know today is forbidden. No woman must touch the river. Adaugo's eyes were cold, without mercy. Then die on the road if you must, she said. But my water must return. Slowly, Nwanyuoma stood. She lifted the clay pot, and turned toward the forbidden path. The wind howled, as if the spirits themselves were watching. If you love powerful African folk tales filled with suspense, destiny, and ancestral justice, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves deep, unforgettable stories. Because what happens to Nwanyuoma on that road will change this household forever. As the years passed and no child came, the pressure on Okori began to grow. It did not come suddenly. It came slowly, like a dripping roof that never allows one to sleep. Elders began to call him aside after meetings. They spoke in low voices, but their words were heavy. Okori, one of them said, clearing his throat, a man's name does not stand firm without a child. Another added, your house needs a voice that will call you father. Okori listened in silence. He nodded respectfully, but his heart was troubled. At home, he became quieter. He sat longer than usual, staring into space. One evening, Nwanyuoma noticed and asked gently, my husband, what troubles your heart? Okori sighed. People talk, he said. They say I am growing old without an heir. She lowered her eyes and replied, the gods hear everything. Do not let words push you into regret. But the words did not stop. Women spoke to his mother. Men laughed carelessly when they drank together. Each voice added weight to his thoughts until he could no longer carry them alone. One morning, an elder spoke plainly. Take another wife, he said. It is better to act than to wait forever. Okori struggled with the decision, but in the end, fear defeated patience. He married a younger woman named Adaugo. She entered the home with bright eyes and a bold step. Her laughter was loud, and her presence filled every corner. She spoke freely and expected attention. Where Nwanyuoma was quiet, Adaugo was fire. Barely months after the marriage, Adaugo conceived. The news spread quickly. Drums were beaten, women sang, men clapped and praised Okori. At last, someone shouted, his name will continue. Adaugo walked proudly, her head high, her smile sharp. She placed her hands on her stomach and said loudly, this is what a real wife brings. Nwanyuoma heard those words. She felt them cut through her heart, but she did not show it. On the day the celebrations filled the air, she tied her wrapper neatly, joined the women, and danced slowly. Her smile never left her face, even as tears burned behind her eyes. When Adaugo needed water, Nwanyuoma fetched it. When food was to be cooked, she cooked it. When the house needed care, she cared for it. One night, Okori spoke softly to her. You are strong, he said. She smiled and replied, our home must stand, no matter the storm. As Adaugo's belly grew, so did her pride. She spoke with confidence and walked as if she owned the ground beneath her feet. Yet it was Nwanyuoma who kept the household together. She woke early, worked late, and treated Adaugo's condition with care, even when her heart ached. And so, under the sound of drums and the noise of celebration, two women lived under one roof. One carried life in her womb, the other carried pain in her silence, and seen by them all. The balance of the home had shifted, and the seeds of future conflict were already taking root. Okori was a hard-working man, known across the village for his strength and discipline. Every morning, before the sky fully opened its eyes, he would wake up, wash his face, and tie his climbing rope firmly around his waist, with his calabash hanging by his side. He would walk into the forest where the palm trees stood tall and silent. The wind often whispered through the leaves as he climbed, but Okori never feared it. His hands were steady, his steps careful. By the time other men were just leaving their homes, Okori had already tapped enough palm wine to earn respect and food for his household. Okori is a real man, the elders often said while sipping his wine. He does not eat another man's sweat. He greeted everyone respectfully, spoke little, and minded his business. Yet, beneath that respect and hard work, Okori carried a quiet flaw. He listened too much to the voices of others, and when worry entered his heart, it stayed there. His first wife, Oma, came into his life when they were both young and hopeful. She was gentle by nature, the kind of woman who spoke softly even when angry. Her laughter was light, and her movements were calm. From the first day she entered Okori's compound, she treated it like sacred ground. She swept the yard before sunrise, cooked meals with care, and welcomed visitors with warm water and kind words. Oma, you try, the neighbors would say. She would smile and reply, it is my duty. But as the months turned into years, something painful became clear. Oma did not conceive. At first, it was not a problem. Children come when they want, her mother-in-law said. Do not rush the gods. Okori also believed this. He would hold her hand at night and say, be patient. We still have time. Time passed. 1 year became 2, 2 became 5. The patience of people began to wear thin. Women in the village started watching her closely. When she fetched water from the stream, some would look at her stomach and sigh. Others would whisper behind her back, is she even a woman? One voice said softly, maybe she offended the spirits. Another replied. Oma heard these words like sharp stones. But she never reacted. She greeted them all the same way. She helped during festivals. She cooked during communal gatherings. Yet, when other women carried babies on their backs, she walked alone. She tried everything within her power. One elderly woman gave her herbs soaked in hot water and said, drink this for 7 mornings. Do not tell anyone. Another woman instructed her to bathe with special leaves under the full moon. She obeyed. Once, a diviner looked at her palm and said, your path is long, but not empty. That small hope kept her alive. At night, when Okori slept beside her, breathing deeply after a long day, Oma would stay awake. She would stare at the roof of their hut and place her hands gently on her flat stomach. In a whisper meant only for the spirits, she prayed, my Creator, hear me. Even if I do not give birth, do not let me be disgraced. Give me peace. Sometimes tears rolled down her cheeks, soaking into the mat. She wiped them quickly before dawn, rose up, and prepared Okori's food like nothing was wrong. One evening, Okori returned early and found her sitting quietly, staring into space. Oma, he called. She looked up. Yes, my husband, you are quiet today. I am fine, she answered, forcing a smile. Okori nodded, but his heart was heavy. Outside, he could hear other men laughing with their children, and sighed. Silence sat between him and his wife. He loved her kindness, her loyalty, her patience, yet the emptiness of their home spoke louder than words. And while Nwanyuoma carried her pain in silence, and Okori carried his worry in his heart, the village continued to watch, whisper, and wait, and seen by them all destiny was already moving quietly, preparing a turn none of them could imagine. The day Adorgo went into labor was unlike any day the household had ever seen. From the first light of dawn, there was an unusual tension in the air. Birds seemed to chirp more urgently. The wind carried a strange heaviness, and even the dogs remained still, as if they too were waiting for something important to happen. Inside the hut, Adorgo's cries pierced the quiet morning like a drum signaling battle, sharp and loud, demanding attention. Nwanyuoma, as always, moved silently around her, bringing warm water, wiping sweat from her forehead, and speaking softly. "You are strong, you can do this, the gods are with you." Her voice, calm and steady, contrasted sharply with Adorgo's loud wails, yet it carried an undeniable strength that seemed to guide the room. Okori paced outside the hut, his hands running through his hair, his heart pumping so loudly he was sure the entire village could hear it. He had never seen a birth before, only heard stories, and even now, the reality of it made him unsure whether to stay near or step back. He muttered to himself, "To children. Please, just healthy children. That is all I ask." A neighbor who had come to assist shouted from inside, "She is almost done. Prepare yourselves." Okori's palms were sweaty as he gripped a wooden post, bracing himself for whatever was coming. And then, after hours that felt like an eternity, a cry cut through the tension, a high, sharp wail of life. The women attending the birth gasped, "It is one, no two," someone shouted. The room erupted into chaos, not the kind of chaos that causes fear, but the kind that pours out joy, relief, and astonishment all at once. Two tiny daughters, small and fragile, lay swaddled and crying, their faces red and wrinkled. Adorgo's chest heaved as she laughed through her exhaustion. "Look, too. My womb does not fail," she said, her voice strong now with pride and triumph. Okori rushed inside, his eyes wide, a smile spreading across his face that made him seem younger, lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. "My children," he whispered, shaking. "My daughters, the gods have blessed us." From that moment, everything shifted. Okori's attention, once evenly split, now followed Adorgo like a shadow. Every smile she gave, every request she whispered, he answered quickly, eager to prove his love, eager to bask in the joy of new life. He brought her food himself, placed her on soft mats, carried her water, and fussed over her as if he had forgotten the years he had spent worrying and waiting. At night, when the babies cried, he ran immediately to lift them, gently rocking them in his arms, whispering words that made Adorgo laugh weakly in exhaustion. "See," she said, "I told you my womb does not fail. You will never forget me now." He smiled, barely able to speak, because every word felt too small for the feelings in his chest. Soon, he made a decision that changed the structure of their household entirely. He called a meeting with the workers he trusted most. "Build a bigger hut," he commanded. "The children will live there with their mother. It must be wide, strong, and comfortable. No woman or child will be cramped in it." The men nodded and set to work immediately. Poles were cut, mats laid, and a high roof was raised. The new hut stood taller and brighter than any of the others, a sign to the villagers that a new era had begun. When the work was finished, Okori helped Adorgo move in, carrying the babies himself, placing them carefully in their new space. "Here is your place," he said, pride swelling in his chest. "This is where our family begins." Nwanyuoma watched all of this unfold, quietly, from the shadows. She helped carry water for the builders. She cooked extra food for the laborers. She made sure the hut was clean and ready, smoothing the mats and arranging the small belongings of the new family. No one thanked her. No one noticed the tremble in her hands or the quiet tears she swallowed. When a doggo walked past her, head high, laughing with her new children in her arms, Monu Oma forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. Inside, she felt herself slipping, becoming invisible in the home she had once helped build with her own hands and heart. Days turned into weeks. Okori's gaze rarely fell on her. His conversations no longer included her. When she spoke, he answered briefly, distracted, and always with his mind on Adorgo and the twins. Even when Nwanuoma prepared the evening meal or carried water to the new hut, he hardly acknowledged her presence. Her own home, once familiar and full of respect, had become a place where she moved silently, careful not to disturb the joy of others. She was a ghost in her own life, watching as the man she had loved for years gave every ounce of his attention, every glance, every word, to the woman who had come later. One evening, unable to contain herself entirely, she approached him. "Okori," she said softly, her voice breaking in places, "you have not sat with me in many days. Do you not remember me?" He looked at her for a moment, frowning slightly, discomfort flashing in his eyes. "The children, they need me now," he said. "You understand?" She nodded slowly, though her chest ached so heavily it felt as though it might break. "I understand," she whispered. And she turned away, retreating to the corner of her old hut where no one would notice her, where she could watch without being seen. At night, when the laughter and cries of the twins echoed through the new hut, Nwanuoma lay on her simple mat, staring at the ceiling. Her hands rested on her empty belly, and she whispered into the darkness, "May the gods be with them. May they grow in peace, even if I do not belong here anymore." Tears fell slowly, unheeded, and she swallowed them. She had become invisible in her own home, a shadow moving silently among the living, carrying her grief with dignity, and holding a quiet hope that someday the balance might shift again. One evening, the air was heavy with the smell of fermenting palm wine. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. And men gathered under the large tree near the tapping site. Laughter rang out. But it was the kind of laughter mixed with exhaustion and relief after a long day. Okori sat among them, his calabash full, his hands shaking slightly from both the heat and the drink. "Okori," a friend called, raising his own cup. "You have worked hard today. Drink, my brother, drink deep. The gods favor you tonight." Okori smiled faintly, raising his cup. "Yes, yes, we drink. May the spirits of the palm tree bless us." He slurred slightly, the words heavier than usual. As the evening passed, the cups were filled again and again. Stories were told of daring climbs, of spirits seen in the forest, of twins born and names given. Okori laughed. Louder than he had in years, the sound rolling into the night. The drink warmed him, loosened him. And somewhere deep inside, his mind began to drift. He did not notice the hours slipping by, nor did he notice the shadow of himself growing heavier, duller, until his thoughts no longer belonged to the present. When the men began to leave, Okori stood unsteadily, gripping the tree for support. I will go home," he murmured. A friend tried to steady him. "Walk slowly, brother. The road is long and dark." Okori nodded, but his vision blurred, and his steps faltered. The path to his home felt strange, twisted. The familiar walls of his hut appeared as though through mist. He opened the door. Barely aware that it was his own hand that turned the latch, Nonyulma sat inside, quietly tending the hearth, unaware of the world outside. "My husband?" she asked softly. Looking up, her eyes held concern, but the words faltered on her lips as she saw his unsteady form. I am home," he said, voice low, unsteady, almost unrecognizable. He swayed, catching the edge of the mat for balance. I have come home," before either of them fully understood what was happening. His exhaustion and the haze of the palm wine took over. Nonyulma, moved by compassion, guided him to the sleeping mat. "Rest," she whispered, laying her hand on his shoulder. "You have worked too hard today. Sleep now." He nodded faintly. And in that confused, heavy state, he sank into sleep beside her. His mind was foggy, clouded with drink, and for the first time in years, he did not think of anyone else. The warmth of the hut, the steady presence of Nonyulma, the soft light of the fading fire, everything blurred together. They slept side by side, silent, unaware that fate had quietly shifted in that moment. Morning came slowly. As sunlight spilled through the cracks in the walls, Nonyulma woke first, stretching quietly, her eyes falling on him. She hesitated, heart pounding. Something in the night had changed, though she could not name it yet. Okori stirred, waking with a start. His eyes met hers, wide, confusion clouding his face. What happened?" he muttered, voice husky. His hands fumbled for words. He saw the mat, saw her beside him, and a sudden realization struck like a whip. Shame rushed into him, burning deep. Nonyulma's face was calm, but her chest ached. She did not speak at first. She only moved to the side, letting the moment breathe, letting the silence speak. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with guilt, with regret, with a tension neither could break. Okori began, his throat dry. "I did not." "You were tired," Nonyulma said softly, interrupting him. Her voice was steady, almost impossibly gentle. "Sleep took you. The night, it was too heavy. Do not carry shame in your heart yet." But Okori could not stop the weight pressing on him. He lowered his head, closing his eyes, trembling slightly. I have sinned. I do not know how this came to pass." They sat in silence after that. Words failed them. Only the flickering fire and the distant sounds of the village filled the room. Regret hung like a shadow over the hut. The air was heavy, thick with the memory of the night, and the world outside continued as if nothing had changed. Yet inside, everything had changed. The night had passed, but its consequences were only beginning to stir. Nonyulma rose slowly, gathering water and preparing the morning fire. Okori remained seated, head bowed, caught between shame and confusion. Neither spoke further. And yet both felt the weight of what had happened, a night of unintended passion. A night that would whisper through the days to come, shaping destinies in ways neither could yet imagine. Weeks passed after that fateful night, and Nonyulma began to notice subtle changes in her body. At first, she thought it was her imagination, small twinges in her stomach, a heaviness she had never felt before, and a quiet, unfamiliar warmth that seemed to grow day by day. She moved slowly through her chores, carrying water, grinding millet, and sweeping the floor, but each step now felt different. Her breath came quicker, her heart beat faster when she bent to lift heavy parts. "Is something wrong, Nonyulma?" a neighbor asked one morning as she passed. "You seem different." She smiled faintly and shook her head. "Nothing. Nothing at all. I am just tired from work," she replied. hiding the strange feeling that had taken root in her belly, but the changes continued. Her body felt lighter at times, and yet heavier at others. She noticed a fullness she had never known. And at night, when the house was quiet and Okori slept elsewhere, she would place her hands on her stomach and whisper softly, almost as if testing the truth of her senses. Could it be? The curiosity, the fear, and the hope grew until she could no longer hide it. She decided to visit the village midwife, a woman known for seeing into the secrets of the body and the womb. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked at the midwife's door. "Come in, come in," the midwife said kindly, her eyes sharp and knowing. "What brings you here so early?" Nwanu almost stepped inside. Lowering her eyes, I feel something strange," she said, her voice shaking. "My body, it is different. I do not understand. I thought it could never happen." The midwife nodded slowly, motioning for her to sit. "Let us see," she said softly, her hands gentle as they examined her. She pressed carefully on the stomach, whispered words that carried ancient power, and listened to her own intuition. Time seemed to stretch, each second thick with anticipation. Finally, the midwife looked up. Her eyes were wide, but her face held a grave respect. "Monuoma," she said quietly, almost reverently, "you are with child." The words struck Monuoma like lightning. Her eyes widened. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Child, but how?" I thought," the midwife nodded, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "I have seen many things in my life, woman, but this is truth. You carry life within you. A son may come, but for now, know that the child grows strong." Monuoma stepped outside into the soft sunlight, trembling. The air seemed sharper, the world brighter, yet heavier than it had ever felt. She walked slowly through the village, feeling every step, every eye upon her, even if no one spoke. Whispers began almost immediately. "Did you hear? Monuoma is with child. Impossible." Another voice said, "She never bore a child before. Something has happened. Something strange." Someone muttered. Fear and awe mingled in the air around her. Children paused in the streets, women lowered their voices, and men who had once laughed at her now looked on with a mix of curiosity and respect. Monuoma felt a strange weight pressing on her chest. Her heart raced, her mind spun, and yet, beneath it all, a quiet spark of hope glowed. She returned home slowly, clutching her stomach, aware of the house, the shadows, and the whispers that seemed to follow her. Adogo was there, as usual, her voice loud and proud as she tended to the twins. Monuoma paused at the doorway, not yet ready to reveal the secret, fearing both the reaction of her co-wife and the judgment of her husband. When Okori appeared, she saw the concern in his eyes. "Monuoma, what troubles you?" he asked. She shook her head faintly. "Nothing yet," she whispered. "I will tell you when the time is right." But the moment had changed everything. A seed of shock had been planted in the household. Whispers began to circulate quietly among the servants and the neighbors, their voices trembling between awe and fear. "It is impossible, yet true," someone said. "The first wife, she carries life now." Monuoma moved through her home carefully, invisible in many ways, yet carrying the most impossible secret of all, a child growing in her womb. A child born from a night of confusion and fate. A child whose arrival would shake the household to its core. Every glance from Adogo, every smile from Okori, every whisper in the wind reminded her of the danger and the wonder of what had begun. And so, with each passing day, Monuoma felt both the weight and the miracle of her pregnancy, She did not yet tell anyone. She did not yet reveal the joy or the fear inside her. But the world had begun to notice. Something unusual was growing, something powerful, something that would change everything for the man she loved, the woman who had replaced her, and the house that had become a place of both shadow and light. The morning air was thick with tension. News had reached the village elders that something unusual was growing in Wanuoma's womb. Whispers had spread through the compound and beyond, carried like the wind from one ear to the next. Finally, the chief priest, Dibia Madoka, was summoned to the house. His steps were slow but purposeful, and every eye turned to watch him as he entered the compound. He was a man whose presence alone commanded silence. The elders and household members fell back, creating a wide space for him, while the wind stirred the palm leaves above, as though the spirits themselves had come to witness the event. Okori stepped forward. Dibia Madoka, we are honored by your visit, he said, bowing slightly. The priest nodded, his gaze steady and unblinking. I come not for honor, but for truth, he replied. His voice was calm, but it carried weight, a gravity that made even the boldest men pause. He stepped closer to the first wife Nwanuoma, and examined her carefully. His hands hovered over her belly without touching, as if he were reading the very spirit inside her. Adogo, the second wife, stood nearby, her face proud, her chest puffed. She whispered to one of the house girls, let us see what tricks she plans now, our son. Impossible. The priest ignored her. He closed his eyes and began to murmur words under his breath, slowly at first, then louder. His body began to sway slightly, as if moved by invisible currents. His voice rose and fell rhythmically, and the hair on Nwanuoma's arms and neck stood on end. The room seemed to grow colder and warmer all at once. The household watched in awe and fear, even. Okori felt a chill run down his spine. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Then Dibia Madoka spoke, his eyes still closed, his voice strong and commanding. This womb, he said slowly, pointing toward Nwanuoma, carries a son, one who will shift the balance of this home. He is destined to change the fortunes of all who dwell here. He is neither ordinary nor common. The spirits watch him. The ancestors have spoken. Silence fell like a heavy cloth. Even the wind seemed to stop. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, a soft gasp came from Adogo. Her smile, once full of pride and certainty, froze completely. Her eyes widened as the words sank into her mind, twisting it with disbelief, fear, and something darker, jealousy. No, it cannot be, she whispered under her breath, though the sound carried enough to make Nwanuoma glance at her. Mark my words, he continued, his voice echoing slightly. The child in this womb will not only grow, but he will command attention. Love will shift, affection will falter. What you know as home will be tested. Guard yourselves, for from that day, love becomes poison. Nwanuoma's hands pressed to her chest, her heart pounded. Fear mingled with hope in a strange, dizzying way. She knew the weight of this prophecy would change everything. She looked at Okori, who stood frozen, unsure whether to rejoice or tremble. And then her gaze fell on Adogo. The younger wife's face was pale, her lips pressed into a hard line. Her pride was wounded, her joy stolen, and the first flicker of envy sparked in her eyes. The priest turned slowly and walked to the center of the compound, still speaking in a low, melodic chant that seemed to ripple through the very walls. The balance is no longer as it was. Watch, for the house will tremble under the weight of this child. Some will gain, some will lose, and some will see love become a weapon. Sharp and bitter, Odogo took a step back, clutching her twins to her chest, her mind spinning. She whispered to herself, "O son? How could this happen to her? This cannot be allowed." Nwonyu Oma remained still, silent, yet inside, a storm of emotions raged. She felt fear, yes, but also a quiet courage. The prophecy had named her son, given him power before he even drew a breath. She pressed her hands over her belly, feeling life moving inside her, and a strange calm settled over her. Okori finally stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Nwonyu Oma's shoulder. "We must honor this child," he said quietly, though his voice carried a weight of confusion and awe. "Whatever comes, we must protect him." The priest nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the household one last time. "Prepare yourselves," he said softly, almost to the winds. "The home you know will never be the same. From this moment, love will twist. Hearts will bleed. Trust will falter. Watch and beware." And with that, Dibia Madoka turned and left, leaving the household in stunned silence. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling on each person, burning softly into their minds. Adogo's smile remained frozen, her fingers clutching her daughter's cloth tightly. Nwonyu Oma's chest rose and fell slowly, a mixture of fear and resolve on her face. Okori remained rooted to the spot, unsure where to step next. From that day, the balance of the house shifted. The air seemed heavier. Conversations carried tension. Glances between husband and wives held suspicion, and in the shadows of that home, something unseen began to grow. Love had indeed become poison. After the prophecy had been declared, the atmosphere in the household shifted subtly but noticeably. At first, it was quiet, almost invisible, like the first tremors before a storm. Okori, the man who had once devoted all his energy and love to Adogo and her twin daughters, began to move differently around the home. He noticed Nwonyu Oma more, the way she moved through the compound, the way her steps were slower now, her body carrying the new weight of life within her. He watched her pause to catch her breath, felt the slight swell of her stomach, and the thought struck him sharply. Like an arrow to the chest, she needed care, attention, and protection. One morning, he approached her quietly as she carried a small pot of water. "Nwonyu Oma," he called softly, careful not to startle her. She looked up, her expression calm but guarded. "My husband," she said, nodding politely. I will fetch water for you today," he said, his voice unsteady with unfamiliar tenderness. "You should rest." The elder's words, they must mean something. "You carry life, I cannot ignore this." Her lips parted slightly, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Okori, you need not trouble yourself. I can manage." "No," he said firmly. "Today, I will manage. Sit, Nwonyu Oma. Sit. Let me do this." For the first time in years, she allowed him to take over her duties. She watched silently as he struggled slightly with the heavy pot, his hands rough but steady, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stumbled a little, almost spilling the water, and she couldn't help but hide a faint smile. "You are clumsy today," she teased softly, though her heart fluttered at the gesture. "I am not clumsy," he replied with a small, nervous laugh. "I am careful, careful for you, for the child you carry. I want to be sure nothing happens to either of you." From that day forward, Okori began to change his routine. Each morning, before the sun fully rose, he would check on Nwonyu Oma. He brought her warm food, freshly cooked, sometimes sweet porridge, sometimes soft meat from the village hunters. He ensured her water was always clean and plentiful. When she bent to sweep or grind, he would call softly, Sit, Nwanyuoma. Rest. If only for a moment. At first, Nwanyuoma felt a mixture of wonder and fear. Could the man who had once given all his attention to another truly shift it to her? Could he care so fully without distraction, without hesitation? She nodded in quiet gratitude, accepting the help, though she never asked for it. She felt the gentle warmth of his attention like sunlight on cool skin, and for the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. But in another corner of the household, another presence watched silently. Adogo, the fiery second wife, noticed immediately the shift in Okori's attention. She had been used to his constant care. The way he played with her daughters, laughed at her jokes, and carried her food with pride. Now, she saw him kneeling beside Nwanyuoma, adjusting her mat, handing her a bowl of warm porridge, checking her pulse when she complained of dizziness. One afternoon, Adogo approached him while he was helping Nwanyuoma sit comfortably. "Okori," she said sharply, her voice tight, "why are you fussing over her? She is fine. You need not trouble yourself with her." Okori looked up, surprised, his hands still on Nwanyuoma's shoulders. "Adogo," he said slowly, choosing his words, "she carries a child. I cannot ignore that. I must see that she is well. The priest said this child will change our home. I cannot risk neglecting her." Adogo's eyes narrowed, and she turned away, whispering under her breath, "Change our home. How dare she take from me what has always been mine?" From that day, tension began to rise like smoke before a fire. Okori's love, once focused solely on Adogo and her twin daughters, now divided in a new, urgent way. Nwanyuoma, though still quiet and gentle, began to feel the warmth of her husband's attention. Adogo, by contrast, felt a cold shadow settle over her heart. She began to notice that Okori no longer lingered at her side in the evenings, that his laughter no longer followed her jokes, that he now spent more time at Nwanyuoma's side, preparing her food, checking her pulse, and speaking softly to her in ways that made the younger woman's pride and confidence falter. One evening, Adogo confronted him in the courtyard, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Okori, why do you sit with her so long? Do you not see your daughters? Do you not see me? Why does your attention drift?" Okori sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Adogo," he said gently, "you have given me children. I am grateful. But this child, Nwanyuoma, carries a life that is important to all of us. I cannot ignore that. You must understand, my heart has space for the children, for you, and now for her as well." Adogo turned away, biting her lip, her fists clenched at her sides. She whispered to herself, "Space? There is no space for her. None. She must not take him from me. She cannot." And so the house changed. Nwanyuoma's once quiet life began to fill with attention, care, and a cautious joy she had never known. Okori's footsteps followed her more closely. His voice lingered on her ears longer. The younger wife, who had once commanded the household, now felt herself slipping, abandoned in ways she had never imagined. The twins still played at her side, but even their laughter could not fill the growing void. Adogo's pride, her certainty, her sense of ownership all began to crack like clay under pressure. Inside the home, shadows grew longer, glances became sharper, smiles were forced, laughter strained, love, once simple and unquestioned, began to twist into something heavy, uncertain, and bitter. And in the midst of it, Nwanyuoma pressed her hands to her swelling belly and whispered softly, "May you grow strong, my child. May you survive the storms of this home, for they are coming, and soon." Dawn came slowly that day, the sky stretching in muted shades of grey and soft gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the household. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and dew, and the village was still quiet, almost holding its breath. Monuoma stirred lightly on her mat, the soft creak of her body moving barely audible. Her hands instinctively rested on her belly, now rounded with life, feeling the faint movement of the child growing inside her. The morning was calm, yet it carried an uneasy weight, as if the very air knew that what was to come could not be undone. Outside, the sounds of early life began to filter in the soft crowing of roosters, the distant murmur of women preparing breakfast, the creak of wooden doors opening for chores. But inside the home, the household moved with an unusual hush. Monuoma rose slowly, gathering her thoughts, glancing toward the hut where a doggo slept with her twin daughters. Even the faintest noise seemed magnified in the quiet morning. She paused at the doorway, her eyes tracing the path that would lead to the river later in the day, and her heart. A small knot of fear twisted, but she did not speak. Not yet. Meanwhile, Okori stirred in his own hut. He had risen early, as he often did, eager to begin his work tapping palm wine. The day was bright, the air crisp with the promise of labor and routine. He stretched, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and called softly. Monuoma, Adogo, I am leaving for the trees. Monuoma answered quietly, go safely. My husband. Her voice was soft, calm, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Adogo, still half asleep, turned her head and mumbled, be careful. There was tension in her tone, though she did not yet fully understand the day's danger. The trap she had begun to set in the shadows. Okori paused at the doorway for a moment, stretching his arms, adjusting the strap of the calabash bag that would carry the tools he needed for tapping. He smiled faintly at the sight of Monuoma moving silently in the hut, tending to her morning tasks with quiet grace. I will return before the heat grows too strong, he said, unaware of the storm that had already begun in thought and intention within his home. The sunlight grew, spilling over the rooftops, glinting against the walls of the compound. The shadows shifted and lengthened, but Okori did not notice them, his mind already on the path ahead, already thinking of the trees, the taps, the sweet sap he would gather. He did not see the dark glimmer in Adogo's eyes as she watched him leave. He did not see the careful planning in her movements as she glanced toward Monuoma, considering what must happen next. As he stepped outside, the air seemed suddenly sharper, carrying a strange vibration. The birds flinched in their perches. Even the wind felt heavier, pressing against his skin as he made his way toward the fields where he would tap the palm trees. He whistled softly to himself, unaware that the household he had left behind was no longer the same as the one he had woken in. Monuoma watched his back fade into the distance. She adjusted the mat in the doorway, her fingers brushing lightly against the coarse weave, feeling the tension in her body, the small rush of adrenaline that comes when a day of testing begins. She did not speak. She did not act. She only waited, knowing that soon, the first challenge of her pregnancy, of her destiny, would arrive. Adogo moved quietly behind her, gathering herself, smoothing the folds of her cloth, eyes fixed on the first wife. She whispered softly, under her breath, almost to the wind, almost to herself, today, we see what she can do. Today, she tests the spirits. We shall see if fate fears her or if it bends to her courage. The air between them was thick, heavy with anticipation. The calm of the morning belied the danger, the tension, the trials waiting just beyond the walls. The sunlight glinted on the clay pots and wooden beams, casting shadows that seemed to flicker with secrets. Warning of obstacles that might almost take a life, warning of a path that would not be simple, warning of the river that waited quietly, silently, sacred and forbidden. Okori's steps had carried him far from the house, unaware of the storm of jealousy, the plans whispered in shadows, the sacred rules about to be tested. He hummed softly as he walked, thinking only of his work, thinking only of the taps, thinking only of the simple rhythm of labor. And in that moment, the household was left behind, unguarded, silent, holding its breath for the events that would soon unfold. The day had begun, the river waited, and the first test, the first moment of fate, was almost upon them. The change in the household did not go unnoticed by Adogo. Every day, she felt a tightening in her chest, a strange, creeping fear that she could not speak aloud. She watched as Okori tended to Nwanyuoma, bringing her food, checking her health, bending low to speak to her in gentle, careful words. The twins still played at her side, but their laughter no longer brought her the same joy. Even the walls of her hut seemed to whisper against her, as if the house itself were shifting toward Nwanyuoma, toward the first wife who had been ignored for so many years, unable to bear it alone. Adogo sought the counsel of women she considered allies, friends who had watched her grow, who had laughed with her and envied her beauty in equal measure. They gathered in secret, under the cover of darkness, their voices low but urgent. "She is taking him from you," one whispered, leaning close, her eyes wide. "The way he fusses over her now, he forgets you are here. You must act." Adogo's lips pressed into a thin line. "I cannot simply watch," she said, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "This child, this first wife, they cannot take what is mine. I will not allow it." A second friend leaned forward, her eyes shining with mischief. "There are ways," she said quietly. "Whisper words, Adogo. Let them hear the wind. Let them feel unease. Sometimes a curse, softly spoken, can shift the balance before it is too late." Adogo nodded slowly, her mind racing. That night, under the soft glow of the moon, she whispered to herself, words carefully chosen, curling through the shadows. "Let her stumble, let her fear, let the child not grow strong. Let him not take what belongs to me," she muttered. Her voice so low it barely reached the ears of the children sleeping nearby. Yet even in her quiet voice, there was power, a fierce determination, a willingness to test limits and break boundaries. As the days passed, she began to notice the sacred markers of the calendar. The village's traditions had always been clear, and her sharp mind recalled the warning of the elders. A day would come, a day when the river's waters were forbidden, when the spirits themselves would guard it. On that day, no woman was allowed to fetch water from the river. It was a day of power, of restraint, of warning. Adogo's eyes narrowed as she considered the approaching day. If she dares to go, if Nwanyuoma touches the river on that day, she whispered to herself, pacing in her hut, then the spirits will judge her. Perhaps I can guide the spirits to act. Perhaps I can test fate itself." Her mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. She considered the consequences, but her jealousy and fear drowned out caution. The thought of Okori's attention drifting, of the first wife growing stronger, of a child in her rival, wound taking the place of pride and influence she had always claimed, these thoughts burned hotter than any warning, any superstition, any law. That night, she gathered a small bundle of herbs, whispered under her breath, and repeated the phrases she had learned from the old women who had guided her in secret. Each word carried weight, carried intent. The air around her seemed heavier, the shadows deeper, and the flickering firelight cast strange shapes, across the walls of the hut. She closed her eyes and imagined Wanyuoma walking toward the river, struggling, stumbling, tested by every force in the land. An idea had formed in Adogo's mind. And with it came a dangerous excitement, a plan that was both clever and cruel. She would not simply wait and watch. She would act. She would challenge destiny itself. She would bend the sacred rules to her will. And she would see if fate would punish her or if it would bend to her cunning. She whispered again, her voice a low hiss, almost merging with the wind outside. Let me see, if even the spirits fear me, then I will know my power. Her eyes glinted with determination, her fingers tightening round the bundle of herbs, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not the open, bright smile she had used to charm the household, but a dark, calculating smile, sharp and dangerous. She would test fate itself. And in the corners of the household, unknown to her, unseen forces began to stir, sensing the challenge, preparing to respond. The day of reckoning approached. The sacred river waited silently, calm and still, its waters hiding secrets and trials that would soon reveal themselves. The air hummed with tension. Every leaf seemed to whisper warnings, yet Adogo pressed forward, fueled by jealousy, ambition, and the first spark of a plan that would shake the household to its core. The sun climbed high in the sky, relentless and burning, sending sharp light into the compound. The heat pressed down on the huts, the clay floors, and the people within. Wanyuoma stirred slowly from her mat, her body heavy with the life she carried, her belly now rounded and pressing forward with the promise of the child. Each step she took was measured, careful, every motion a test of her strength. Sweat ran down her back. And the morning chores that once seemed light now felt like mountains pressing against her shoulder. As she walked toward the water jars, as she did each morning, expecting the cool relief that had always been there. But her hands met only emptiness. She frowned, pressing her palm to the rim of the first pot. Empty, she whispered, disbelief catching her throat. She moved to the next jar, then the next, her brow furrowing deeper, her steps slowing. One by one, every jar was empty, save for one small pot she did not recognize as hers. It was neat, full and clearly placed apart. Her eyes darted to it, then back to the empty jars, a small shiver running down her spine. Adogo, leaning against the wall in the corner of her hut, watched silently. The morning light glinted off her eyes, sharp and calculating. She whispered under her breath, almost inaudible, yet heavy with meaning. Let her feel it. Let her know what it is to lack. Let her body strain. Let her mind question every step. Let her understand that power belongs to those who seize it. Wanyuoma swallowed hard, bending slightly to lift the small pot. It was heavy, filled to the brim, yet insufficient for her needs. She murmured softly, trying to steady herself, I will make do. I have no choice. The heat pressed against her as she stepped toward the hut for chores, the sweat dripping from her brow. Her hand rested lightly on her belly, feeling the child inside stir. As though sensing the tension in the air, she whispered to him quietly, be patient. My child, we will endure. We must. The water in the small pot was all she had. For washing, for cooking, for drinking it would have to be enough. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she carefully poured some into a basin. The liquid was clear, cool against her hands, but the supply was dangerously limited. She dipped a small cloth into it, letting the water run over her skin, the simple act of bathing now a delicate ritual of conservation. Adogo's eyes followed her every move. She leaned slightly forward, her hands clasped together, her expression cold, a smile playing faintly on her lips. Use what I allow, she whispered. Taste what I choose to give. Feel the restraint. Learn that even simple things are controlled by me. Nwanyuoma moved slowly, deliberately, careful not to waste a single drop. She rinsed herself, the sweat clinging stubbornly to her skin, her body heavy and uncooperative. She shivered slightly, not from cold, but from the strain of the heat and the weight she carried. Each movement took effort, but she persisted. Her thoughts were quiet, focused, the child inside. The path ahead, the courage she would need. Adogo stepped back, watching from the shadowed corner, her eyes narrowing as she noted every small motion, every careful calculation, every drop of water that Nwanyu. The younger woman's pride swelled quietly, her chest tight with jealousy, her mind already forming the next step of her cruel plan. Nwanyuoma finished quickly, carefully pouring the remaining water back into the small pot, ensuring nothing was wasted. She wiped her arms on a cloth. Listening to the soft sounds of the household waking on her, the children laughing in the distance, the faint creak of doors, the wind stirring the palm leaves above. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, feeling both exhaustion and determination in equal measure. Her lips pressed together in quiet resolve. We survive, she whispered softly. We endure. You cannot stop what has begun. Adogo stepped forward slightly, her eyes glinting with danger, her voice low but sharp. Use what I allow. Remember, all you touch, all you take, is by my permission. Nwanyuoma paused, feeling the weight of her presence, yet she did not answer. She simply carried the small pot back toward her duties, aware that every step, every glance, every breath was being observed, and in that moment, the tension thickened. Heavy like the midday sun itself, the household seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, every small noise echoed with anticipation. The first wife had survived the first test, but the eyes of jealousy were watching. The morning sun burned higher, the heat pressing down on the clay floors and the roof of the compound, making the air shimmer with a quiet intensity. Nwanyuoma had just finished bathing with the small pot of water left for her when Adogo stepped forward suddenly, her face twisted in rage, her hands clenching into tight fists. The fire of jealousy that had smoldered for weeks now erupted fully, a storm ready to consume everything in its path. How dare you, Adogo shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the heat. How dare you use what belongs to me, what I have kept for myself? Do you take my house, my husband, my power, and now my water? Nwanyuoma's hands froze on the small pot, her heart pounding. She did not answer immediately. The words were harsh, but her voice remained calm, controlled, though inside, anxiety twisted tightly like a vine on her chest. I did not take what was yours, Nwanyuoma said softly, her voice quiet but firm. I only used the water to survive. I meant no disrespect, Adogo. Please. I only wish to live in peace. Peace. Adogo's laugh was sharp, cruel, slicing through the stillness of the morning. You speak of peace when you flaunt your insolence? When you carry my husband's attention and take what is mine, insolent woman. You think the child in your belly shields you from me? Nwanyuoma's fingers tightened on the pot, the water sloshing slightly. She stepped back instinctively, the weight pressing down on her arms and her heavy belly reminding her of the life she carried. I did nothing to offend you. I only survive. The heat is strong. My body is heavy. Adogo's eyes blazed. You survive because I allow it. She spat. And now, to teach you your place, you will fetch more water. Return it to my hut, where it belongs. This insolence cannot go unpunished. Nwanyuoma's eyes widened in shock. She shook her head slowly. But today is forbidden. The river. No woman must go to it today. The spirits guard it. If we disobey, there is danger. Adogo's anger did not waver. Her voice rose even louder, almost deafening in the quiet compound. I care not for your excuses. No words will save you today. You will obey me, or I will bring shame upon you before the whole village. Do you understand? Nwanu Oma's knees bent instinctively. She fell to the ground, hands pressed together in prayer. Her head low, tears streamed down her face, hot and swift, and her voice broke as she spoke. Please, forgive me, Adogo. I only wish to survive. I beg you. I kneel before you. I will not disobey unless I must. Please, have mercy. I am heavy. My body is weak. The spirits warn us. Adogo leaned closer, her eyes cold and unyielding. Mercy, she sneered. You ask for mercy after daring to take what I guard, after daring to live while I am slighted. You will learn today what it means to defy me. No forgiveness will come from my lips. You will obey, or your name will be disgraced. Nwanuoma's sobs grew louder, the sound echoing through the hut and the compound, but still she did not rise. She pressed her forehead to the clay floor, her hands clinging to her belly as though the child within could give her strength. I beg you, I do not wish dishonor. I only wish peace. For my husband, for the household. Please, I will do what you command. I am ready to face whatever comes. Adogo's lips pressed into a thin, cruel line. She turned her eyes away for a moment, calculating, considering the power she held, the choice she could make. Her mind raced with anger, with jealousy, with the sweet, intoxicating sense of control. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she pointed toward the door. Go, fetch it. And know this: if you fail, if the river claims you, the blame is yours alone. No one will weep for you. Nwanuoma slowly rose to her knees, her arms trembling as she lifted the small pot of water. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath came in ragged waves, but she straightened her back as best she could. She whispered softly, more to herself than to Adogo, if peace demands danger, then I must walk that path. If obedience is survival, then I will survive. Adogo stepped back into the shadow of the hut, her eyes following every careful movement. Her lips curved slightly, a mixture of triumph and curiosity. Let us see, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the morning heat, whether she fears the river, whether she survives the spirits, whether her courage is as strong as she claims. The household seemed to hold its breath. The sunlight burned down, reflecting off the clay floors, casting long, twisted shadows that mirrored the tension in the air. Nwanuoma's hands gripped the small pot, her mind preparing for the trial ahead. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the weight of the pregnancy, the heat, and the threat before her. She had no choice. To save peace, to prevent further disgrace, to follow the command of the woman who held power in this household, she would face the forbidden river. Danger awaited her, unseen and cruel, but her heart, though trembling, was steady in resolve. The eyes of jealousy followed her, sharp and unrelenting. And with every step she took toward fate, she knew the trial of the river was about to begin. The path to the river was not far, but it was treacherous, winding between thick undergrowth and ancient trees whose roots twisted like serpents across the earth. Nwanuoma walked slowly, her steps measured against the weight of her body, the swelling of her belly pressing against her, reminding her of the child she carried. The small pot of water clutched tightly in her hands seemed almost too heavy for her to manage. but she gritted her teeth and continued. Every step was a test of endurance, of courage, of resolve. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the sweat ran freely down her back. She paused for a moment, pressing the flat of her palm against her forehead. "Keep going," she whispered softly, almost as if speaking to the child inside her. "We must endure. We must reach the river. It is forbidden, yes, but it is necessary. Courage is all we have." The forest grew denser as she approached a particularly narrow stretch of the path. There, lying across the dirt, a massive tree had fallen long ago, its roots ripped from the earth like fingers trying to grasp the sky. The trunk was thick, heavy, impossible to step over easily, and the branches jutted sharply, threatening to catch a misstep and send her tumbling to the ground. Any woman in her condition, walking this path lightly, would be warned away by instinct, and yet Nwanuoma's eyes did not waver. She stepped closer, her hands resting on the pot, and took a deep breath. "Spirits of this land," she whispered, her voice soft, trembling only slightly with the weight of the heat and fear, "I come not to disturb, not to defile. I come with purpose. I carry water to the one who commands it. Yes, but more than that, I seek to survive, to keep peace, to honor life. I ask your permission to pass." The wind shifted suddenly. A soft rustling moved through the leaves above, though no creature was visible. The shadows along the ground deepened and stretched, as though the very forest had paused to listen. Nwanuoma pressed her hands together and bowed her head slightly. "I am heavy, I am burdened, yet I walk with respect. If I stumble, if I fall, it is not with disrespect, but with the weight of life and duty. Let me pass, and I will honor your guidance." The branches seemed to part slightly, as if inviting her to step forward. The bark, rough against her hands, offered purchase, and the way was just wide enough for her careful, deliberate steps. She hesitated for a heartbeat, feeling the tension in the air, then placed one foot on the fallen trunk. The wood groaned slightly under her weight, but it held. She moved slowly, balancing herself with one hand on the pot, the other reaching out to steady against the trunk. I will not fail," she whispered aloud, her voice carrying through the still air. "I will not falter. I walk for my child. I walk for peace. I walk with respect." As she crossed the tree, a cool breeze brushed her face, a sudden relief from the scorching sun. It carried with it a faint rustle, almost like a sigh, and she felt a strange calm settle into her chest. The spirits, she realized, had heard her. They had sensed her purpose, her courage, her honesty, and they had allowed her passage. Once she reached the far side, she paused. Placing the small pot carefully on the ground, she rested her hands on her knees, bent slightly, feeling the heat and exhaustion press against her. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as if speaking to invisible beings. "Thank you for letting me pass. I honor your presence, I honor your guidance, and I will not waste the chance you have given me." The forest seemed to shift again, shadows retreating slightly as the sunlight touched the earth more fully. Nwanuoma straightened, grasped the pot once more, and took a deep, steadying breath. The first obstacle had been overcome, but she knew there were more trials ahead. Each step was a test, and each test carried the weight of both life and duty. She spoke softly to herself, a quiet mantra as much as a prayer. One step at a time, one breath at a time. Courage, Nwanuoma. You walk not for yourself alone. You walk for peace, for your child, for what must be done. The spirits have allowed me passage this time. I must not fail the next. The fallen tree lay behind her, a silent reminder of danger and of mercy, of power and of judgment. And as she moved forward, the forest around her seemed to watch, the leaves whispering secrets, the path ahead darkening with the weight of the trials yet to come. The first obstacle had been overcome, but the river, sacred and forbidden, waited ahead, and Nwanyuoma, with pot in hand and courage in her heart, pressed onward. The path to the river grew narrow, lined with thick bushes and towering grasses that swayed in the gentle morning breeze. Nwanyuoma moved carefully, her steps slow and deliberate. The small pot of water clutched tightly to her chest. The weight of the water pressed down, heavy against her arms, but heavier still was the weight in her heart, the fear of what might come, the knowledge of Adogo's anger, the sacredness of the river, and the knowledge that today, every step was a test. As she entered a clearing, the forest around her seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, from the trees above, the sharp chatter of birds broke the silence. Their wings beat against the sky with frantic energy, and their voices, high and piercing, seemed to carry judgment. "You," one cried, diving closer, its small eyes sharp and accusatory, "you who walk with stolen water. You dare take what belongs to another. How dare you carry another woman's life-giving gift?" Another bird joined, circling overhead, its cries joining the first. "Tell us, why do you defy the forest? Why do you take what is not yours? Speak, woman, before the sun burns too hot." Nwanyuoma froze, startled by the voices, the sudden sharpness in the air, the weight of invisible eyes pressing down upon her. She opened her mouth, trembling, unsure if the birds were real or spirits sent to test her. Finally, she knelt slightly, lowering the pot to the ground with care. I have not stolen," she said softly, her voice quivering, full of both fear and honesty. "The water I carry is for survival. It was left for me, though only a small pot, by the woman who rules this house. I do not take from her. I take only what is given. I have done nothing to deceive or harm." The birds hovered closer, their wings beating the air like the drums of judgment. Their voices rose in a chorus, questioning, sharp, accusing, yet tinged with curiosity. "Are you honest, then?" they demanded. "Do you speak truth, or do you lie as women do when they fear punishment?" Nwanyuoma bowed her head, pressed her hands to the pot, and spoke from the deepest part of her heart. "I speak only truth. I carry this water because I must. I obey the rules of the house, I respect the sacred day, and I honor the spirits of the forest. I carry it humbly, with care, and with the hope that my child and I will survive this day." For a long moment, silence fell. The birds hovered, their wings stilling, their eyes sharp and unrelenting. The wind whispered through the leaves, and Nwanyuoma felt the weight of the forest, the weight of spirits and judgment pressing down. She held her breath, waiting, knowing that any misstep, any false word, could bring disaster. Then slowly, as if the forest itself had relaxed, the birds began to shift. One of them, the largest, with feathers glinting in the sun, dipped low, circling her slowly. Its voice, though still high-pitched, carried a tone of understanding. "You speak with humility," it said. "You do not take what is not yours. You honor the spirits. You carry truth in your heart. We forgive your presence here, for your purpose is pure, and your intent is clear." Another bird landed gently on a branch above her head, its head tilting as if studying her carefully. "Humility is rare," it said softly. "Many take without thought. Many carry deceit. You have spoken truth, and thus the path is yours. Go forward, and be cautious, yet confident." Nwanyuoma's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Relief washed through her like cool water, easing the tightness in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, bowing her head slightly. I honor your judgment. I will carry the water carefully, with respect, and will not forget the mercy you have granted me. The birds chirped softly in response, flitting through the branches, circling once more before rising into the sky. Their wings caught the sunlight, glinting like living gems. And then they were gone, leaving the clearing silent once more. Nwanuoma took a deep breath, adjusting her grip on the pot. The first obstacle had tested her courage. The spirits had allowed her passage, and now, even the birds' messengers of the forest, arbiters of truth, had recognized her honesty and humility. She whispered softly to the child within her belly, her voice gentle and full of hope. We are not alone, my little one. The spirits see us. They know our heart. We are allowed to pass, and we must continue. With that, she lifted the pot, steadying it carefully against her chest, and continued down the narrow path. The forest around her seemed less threatening now, the shadows less sharp, the sun's heat less oppressive. Yet, deep in her mind, she knew the next trials would come. Each step carrying its own danger, each obstacle demanding strength, courage, and humility. She pressed on, determined, for the water, for the child, for peace. The path to the river narrowed sharply as Nwanuoma pressed onward, the small pot of water clutched tightly to her chest. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps, her body heavy with pregnancy, sweat running down her back, and the sun pressing down like molten gold. Every step seemed more difficult than the last, the earth uneven beneath her feet, roots and stones threatening to trip her. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, whispering softly to the child within her belly, Be strong, little one. We are almost there. The path is harsh, but we must endure. Suddenly, a sound, a low hiss, cut through the air. The bushes along the path quivered violently, the leaves rustling, as though a great wind had passed. Nwanuoma froze, her pulse quickening. From the shadows of the dense undergrowth, a massive serpent emerged. Its scales gleamed in the sunlight, shifting in colors of green and gold. Its eyes cold and calculating, fixed directly on her. It coiled itself across the path, blocking any passage forward. Nwanuoma's knees shook. Her hands gripped the pot tighter, knuckles white. She could feel the heat of fear rise in her chest, mingling with the heat of the sun. Her voice trembled as she whispered to herself, I cannot go back. I must continue. I must survive. She tried to step forward, but the serpent raised its head, its forked tongue flicking, sensing, testing. A sudden dizziness struck her, and she swayed, nearly fainting under the weight of fear and pregnancy. Her hands pressed against the pot, steadying herself, her lips moving in silent prayer. Please, spirits of the river, protect us. Please, guide us past this trial. I mean no disrespect. I walk with care, I walk with purpose. The serpent's eyes shifted downward, sensing the presence within her womb. It moved slightly, a slow, deliberate motion that created a narrow passage. Its head remained poised, yet the tension eased. Nwanuoma blinked, overwhelmed with awe and fear. She whispered softly, You see the child. You allow passage. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward slowly, inch by inch, following the space the serpent provided. The creature's gaze never left her. Yet it did not strike. With each careful step, she felt her courage rise, bolstered by the sense that some unseen force protected her. Once across, a sudden shimmer appeared before her, a figure, tall and radiant, materializing as though from sunlight itself, a spiritual guardian. Its presence commanding and powerful, its eyes glowing faintly like molten amber, regarded her with a piercing gaze. Mornu Oma froze, bowing slightly, sensing both judgment and authority. You dare defy the sacred law, the guardian said, its voice echoing softly yet with the weight of mountains. The river is forbidden today. No woman may approach, yet here you stand, heavy with life, carrying water not meant for you. Speak, why have you disobeyed? Mornu Oma's chest heaved, her breath shaking, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She pressed her hands together, bowing her head in reverence and humility. I beg your forgiveness, mighty guardian. I do not wish to defy the sacred law out of pride or malice. I only seek to maintain peace in the household. I am heavy with child, and the second wife has forbidden me from using any other water. I have no choice but to fetch it. I come with humility, with respect for your power, and with hope that you will see my heart is pure. The guardian's eyes studied her carefully, piercing into the depths of her soul. The silence that followed was thick, pressing against her chest, heavy as the pot she carried. Mornu Oma's tears ran freely now, streaking the dust and sweat from her face. I speak only truth, she whispered. I carry this water to survive. I obey what I must. I honor the spirits, I honor the law. Please, grant me passage. We mean no harm. A sudden calm spread through the clearing, the wind stilling, the sunlight softening. The serpent, coiled at the side, lowered its head fully, sliding quietly into the undergrowth as though bowing in acknowledgement. The guardian's gaze softened slightly, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with approval. You have spoken with honesty and humility, the guardian said, its voice now gentler but still commanding. You recognize the law. Yet you carry the weight of responsibility with respect. You may pass, take the water. And remember that courage and humility are as powerful as obedience. Mornu Oma exhaled deeply, relief flooding her chest. She knelt briefly, pressing her forehead to the earth, whispering words of thanks. Thank you, she said softly. I honor your judgment. I will continue with care and respect, and I will not forget your guidance. With trembling hands, she lifted the small pot once more. The air round her was calm now, the heat of the sun less oppressive, the path smoother though still challenging. She moved carefully toward the river, each step measured, her mind full of gratitude and awe. She dipped her hands into the cool, sacred water, filling her pot to the brim, the liquid shimmering in the sunlight like liquid silver. The river calmed, its surface smooth and gentle, as though acknowledging her courage, her humility, and her purpose. Mornu Oma breathed in deeply, steadying herself, feeling the blessing of the spirits and the unseen forces that had guided her. She whispered softly to the child in her belly, See, my little one, the spirits walk with us. The path is hard, but they have chosen to protect us. We are not alone. And as she turned to leave, the forest around her seemed to hum with quiet approval. The shadows of the trees shifted, the sunlight dancing through the leaves, and Mornu Oma felt a presence, powerful and unseen, watching over her. The gods had chosen their side. Mornu Oma stepped carefully onto the familiar path leading back to the household, the small pot of water balanced carefully in her arms. Her body was heavy, swollen with the life growing within her, and yet every step felt lighter than it had on the way to the river. The forest around her seemed to lean away, the trees parting slightly as if to honor her passage. The sun had climbed high, casting golden light over the earth, and the heat no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a witness to her courage. As she drew closer to the village, the distant sounds of daily life grew sharper. Children were playing, women calling to one another as they carried baskets and clay pots. The laughter, the movement, The rhythm of the village seemed to pause as whispers began to ripple through the air. Villagers who had seen her leave for the forbidden river now stopped. Eyes widening, mouths opening in astonishment. She went to the river, one woman whispered. To her companion, her voice trembling with disbelief, on the forbidden day, and she lives. Another shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on Oma. Surely this is impossible. No woman may cross the river today. The spirits themselves warn us. Yet she returns, unscathed. Carrying the water, Oma walked steadily, ignoring the murmurs. Though she felt the weight of their disbelief pressing against her, she did not falter, though her muscles ached, though the pot pressed against her belly, though her breath came in small, uneven pulls. She whispered softly, almost to herself, almost to the child within her, "We are protected. We are watched. We have not failed." Adogo, standing near the entrance to their compound, had been watching from a distance. She had been confident that the test of the river, the sacred day, the spirits, would be enough to break her co-wife. She had imagined Oma stumbling, the water spilling, the shame flooding her like a river herself. But now, as the first wife approached, every step measured, calm and resolute, Adogo felt her confidence falter. Her hands trembled slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. The heat of anger that usually coursed through her veins was tempered by something stronger, colder, and unnerving. She watched as Oma carefully placed the pot on the clay floor of the household. Not spilling a single drop, every movement was deliberate, precise, and dignified. Oma lifted her head, eyes calm and steady, and spoke softly, but with quiet authority. "The water has been fetched," she said. "It is safe. No harm has come." The villagers, still gathered at a distance, whispered among themselves, their voices rising and falling like the wind through the palm trees. She survived the forbidden day. She walked where no woman dared. Adogo's hands clenched at her sides. Her mind raced, the reality settling in like a heavy stone. The small tremor in her chest grew, a recognition that some force far greater than her own jealousy had guided Oma. Her eyes flicked to the pot of water, then to the calm expression on her co-wife's face. She realized, with a shiver that ran down her spine, that the spirits, the guardians of the river, and the gods themselves had chosen to protect her rival. "How," she whispered under her breath, the words almost lost to the wind. "How could the spirits allow her to pass? How could the river, the sacred day, the law itself bend for her?" Oma, sensing the eyes upon her, did not speak of the spirits, did not boast of her survival. She only stood tall, breathing slowly, her hands resting lightly on her swollen belly, the small pot of water at her feet a testament to her courage. She had faced the river, the serpents, the spiritual guardian, and the dangers of the forest. And she had returned victorious. Adogo's face was pale now, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and grudging respect. Her lips moved slightly, forming words she did not speak aloud. The realization had come too sharply. She could not touch what the gods protected. She could not shame or harm Oma when the very forces of the sacred day had chosen her side. A hush fell over the compound as the villagers absorbed the sight. Some bowed their heads in reverence. Some whispered prayers for courage and protection. And some simply stared, wide-eyed, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Oma finally spoke, her voice calm but filled with quiet strength. "The water is safe. We honor the spirits, and we honor the household. No harm has come. And all may continue in peace." The villagers nodded slowly, or etched into their faces. Adogo stood frozen, a storm of anger, jealousy, and fear contained within her chest, yet powerless to act against the divine will that had chosen to protect her co-wife. The eyes of the gods, the guardians of the river, and the spirits of the land had intervened. They had witnessed courage, humility, and truth. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted, silently, unmistakably. Monuoma's lips curved faintly, a quiet, knowing smile. She did not gloat, she did not boast, but she felt the weight of survival, of protection, of divine favor resting upon her shoulders. The river had tested her, the obstacles had challenged her. The spirits had judged her and she had been found worthy. The second wife trembled. She realized, in the deepest part of her heart, that no jealousy, no cunning, no cruelty could touch what the gods themselves had chosen to protect. The villagers watched in disbelief. Whispers spreading like wildfire. A forbidden journey, yet she lived. A challenge meant to destroy. Yet it had only revealed her strength. And in the quiet, the heat, and the lingering tension of the household, one truth became undeniable. The gods had chosen their side. The village fell into an easy silence as the word spread. The chief priest had been summoned once more. Monuoma, still carrying the quiet strength of her forbidden journey, stood in the corner of her hut. Her hands folded over her swollen belly, eyes alert, listening to the distant murmur of drums and the low reverent whispers of villagers. Even the wind seemed hushed, as though it, too, waited for the priest's arrival. Adogo, her second wife, paced the courtyard, her steps sharp against the packed earth. Her face, pale and tight with tension, betrayed a flicker of fear beneath the fury. She could not stop the gnawing doubt that had taken root ever since Monuoma returned from the river alive, water safe in her hands, protected by forces she could not comprehend. Okori, standing nearby, leaned against the doorway silent, watching the women with a mixture of dread and awe. He could feel the weight of the household's tension pressing down, heavier than the sun overhead. And now, the summons of the chief priest loomed over them all like a shadow, an invisible hand poised to reveal truths none dared speak aloud. A horn sounded from the village square, its low, resonant call echoing through the huts and trees. It was the summons. Unmistakable, the villagers murmured, forming small groups. Their faces pale with anticipation and fear. Monuoma's eyes narrowed slightly. The priest's presence always carried weight, but now, after all that had happened, after the river, the forbidden water, the courage she had shown, this visit promised revelation and judgment. Soon, the chief priest appeared, his robes flowing, his steps measured, his staff tapping the earth with a steady, commanding rhythm. His eyes, deep and knowing, swept over the gathered villagers, the compound, the two women, and finally rested on Okori. Silence, he commanded, and the crowd obeyed instantly. Even the wind seemed to still, and the rustle of leaves faded into nothing. The spirits have spoken, the priest continued, his voice deep and resonant, carrying through the square like the rumble of distant thunder. They watch, they judge, and now, they declare that the time of reckoning has come. Adogo's face paled further. Her hands trembled at her sides. Judgment, she whispered to herself. Barely audible. Judgment for what? For a pot of water. For a woman's survival. Monuoma's lips pressed together. Her own pulse quickening. She did not speak, though her mind raced. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon her, the spirits that had protected her still lingering, as if preparing for the declaration about to come. The chief priest lifted his hands, and the murmuring of the villagers fell silent entirely. Hear now the voice of the spirits, he said, lowering his eyes to the ground. His voice shifted, a soft, trembling intonation, as though he had entered a trance. They speak through me. They declare that the household has been tested. They declare that the innocent have endured. They declare that deceit and jealousy cannot escape. Notice, a hush fell over the villagers, the heat of the day pressing down, but no one moved. Oma felt her heart thrum in her chest. She pressed her hands together over her belly, whispering softly, "We have walked with courage, little one. We have survived the trials. The spirits are here." The priest's eyes rolled back slightly, his voice growing both louder and yet distant, carrying the cadence of something otherworldly. The household has been shaken. The hearts of men and women alike have been tested. The waters have been crossed where none should tread. The spirits declare that the scales must now be balanced, that justice will come, and that judgment is near. Heed this warning. For the gods watch, they observe, they decide. Adogo's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the side of the hut for support. "No, no," she whispered. "It cannot. It cannot be her favored. It cannot." Okori, listening to the priest, felt a chill run through him, every word cut through the air, sharp as the edge of a blade. Rage, guilt, and shame pressed against his chest once more. But beneath it was a dawning realization. The spirits had spoken through the priest, and there would be no escape from the judgment that was coming. Nwanyuma lowered her head slightly, but her voice, when she spoke under her breath, was steady. "If the spirits have spoken, then we must endure what comes. Courage and truth are our shields. We have done what is right. And no cruelty, no jealousy, no malice can do that." The villagers shivered as the priest raised his staff again, signaling the end of the trance. He opened his eyes, clear and commanding. "Judgment is coming," he declared, his voice ringing like the toll of a distant bell. "Prepare yourselves. Witness the truth. And know that the spirits favor those who walk with honesty, courage, and humility." The words hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Adogo trembled, silent now, the anger that had defined her giving way to fear, uncertainty, and the cold realization that something far greater than her jealousy had entered her world. Oma's hands rested lightly on her belly, the small pot of water at her feet, and she felt the calm certainty of divine favor. The same protection that had guided her across the river now surrounding her in the tense silent courtyard. And as the villagers absorbed the pronouncement, as the shadows shifted and the wind stirred softly through the leaves, one truth became undeniable. The spirits had spoken, and judgment was coming. Okori had returned from the palm wine tapping, his body tired from the morning climb up the tall palms, the heavy bundles of wine sap strapped carefully to his back. The sweat on his brow had begun to dry in the harsh heat of the day, but as he stepped into the compound, a strange stillness hung in the air. The usual bustle of the household was muted, the voices of the children quieter than usual, and even the faint laughter of villagers nearby seemed distant, as though swallowed by an invisible weight. He set down the heavy bundle of sap and wiped his hands on his loincloth. Frowning slightly, something felt off. The air was charged, thick with tension, as if the world itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Then he heard it, the sharp, tremulous voices of the women Adogo, his second wife, and Oma, his first, reaching him from the main hut. At first, he thought the sounds were ordinary quarrels, the usual arguments that sometimes flared between the women of his house. But as he stepped closer, the words became clear, sharp, and unavoidable. "You dare disobey me. You carry what belongs to me, insolent woman. Do you think I will allow it?" Adogo's voice rang, cold, cutting, like steel against stone. I only seek to survive," Oma answered, her voice quivering yet steady, carrying both fear and determination. I mean no disrespect. The river is forbidden, yes, but I carry the water with humility and care. I only wish to keep peace in the household, not dishonor. Okori's brow furrowed, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. He stepped closer, unnoticed, but every word reached him, every tone, every tremor of fear or anger echoing in his ears. His pulse quickened as he realized the gravity of the exchange. Adogo's laughter, sharp and cruel, cut through the air. Peace. You speak of peace when you flaunt your disobedience. You will fetch the water. You will obey, or I will disgrace you before everyone. Oma's voice rose in desperation, trembling yet resolute. I beg you, the river is sacred today. No woman may approach, please. I kneel before you. I only wish to survive, to protect my child. To preserve peace, I beg forgiveness. Okori froze. Each word struck him like a blow. Rage surged first, a sharp, sudden heat that burned from his chest to his temples. How could the women, his wives, his household raise their voices so? How could there be such fear, such conflict, in what should have been his orderly home? He felt the weight of authority pressing against him, yet realized, with a sudden sinking, that he had no control over the forces at play. And then the fury twisted, mingling with something darker. Guilt, sudden and sharp, pricked at his conscience. He remembered the way he had ignored Oma for years, leaving her in silence while Adogo, his second wife, received his attention, his laughter, his love. He remembered the night, months ago, when the wine had flowed too freely, when he had slept unknowingly beside Oma, and the life inside her had begun against all odds. He felt shame settle over him like a heavy cloak, suffocating, pressing against his chest. Shame for his absence, for his favoritism, for the jealousy he had allowed to fester in Adogo's heart unchecked. Shame for the turmoil now shaking his household, for the danger Oma had willingly embraced to obey the co-wife's cruel demands. He stepped closer to the hut, his bare feet crunching softly on the dirt floor. Every word reached him, every plea, every accusation. He wanted to speak, to intervene, to demand obedience, yet he knew deep down that this was not a battle of words he could control. Something far greater was at work, something he had only glimpsed in the trembling resolve of his first wife. Oma, he whispered softly, almost under his breath, as if speaking might shatter the moment. What have you done? What dangers have you faced? For me, for peace. Adogo's voice hardened. Sharp as a blade, he sees nothing, he knows nothing. This insolent woman dares to defy the sacred law, and yet he will do nothing. Okori's eyes widened in realization. He had heard everything, the anger, the pleading, the courage, the humility. He had witnessed the storm of jealousy, the manipulation, and the peril that his first wife had endured. Rage, guilt, shame, they tore through him, each emotion jagged and relentless. He felt powerless, yet painfully aware that he could no longer pretend to be blind to the forces at work, to the divine protection that had guided Oma. His chest heaved. He pressed a hand to his brow, trying to steady the storm of thoughts and emotions raging within. The gods, he murmured softly, awe and fear mingling in his voice. The spirits, they have chosen her, they have protected her, and I am only witness. The realization burned hot and bitter. Rage at his absence, guilt for his negligence, shame for the imbalance he had allowed in his household. It all converged in a single, suffocating moment. And yet, underneath it all, a flicker of something else began to emerge, all respect, and a dawning understanding that courage, humility, and divine favor were forces far greater than his own authority. Okori stepped back slightly. Silent now, letting the voices continue. Every word, every tear, every trembling plea reached him fully, and he knew that his household would never be the same. He had heard everything: rage, guilt, shame, and a deep, trembling awareness that the gods had spoken through the courage of a woman he had long neglected. The night had settled quietly over the household, the moon casting silver light over the clay huts and the surrounding palms. Nwanyuoma lay on her mat, the heat of labor pressing against her. Her body tense with pain yet filled with a quiet determination. Each breath she drew was measured, deliberate, and every contraction reminded her of the life she carried, the life the spirits themselves had chosen. Okori knelt beside her, his hands resting lightly on hers, the weight of worry pressing down on his chest. He had watched her endure trials that would have broken any other woman, and now he saw her courage shining in the hardest trial of all. "Nwanyuoma," he whispered softly, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "Hold on. Just a little longer. You are strong. Stronger than any of us imagined." Nwanyuoma's lips curved into a faint, strained smile. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. I will endure," she whispered between contractions. "The spirits are with us. The child, our child, will be safe." Adogo, sitting nearby in the shadow of the hut, had been watching silently. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and the usual arrogance and scorn she carried had been replaced by a tense, bitter anticipation. She could feel the weight of what was happening, though she refused to admit it aloud. It cannot be her child that brings honor," she whispered under her breath, her hands clenched into fists. The hours stretched, the night deepened, and the household held its breath. The air seemed thick with anticipation, and the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the rhythmic cries of the laboring mother and the soft, anxious murmurs of those who watched. Finally, with a sharp, desperate cry, Nwanyuoma felt the last contraction surge through her body. She pressed her hands to her chest, inhaling sharply, and then silence fell. The hush of relief, heavy and profound, filled the hut. Okori's eyes widened as the child was placed gently in her arms. Wrapped in a soft cloth, Nwanyuoma looked down and gasped softly. The baby boy lay there, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. But it was not just his life that caught her attention, it was the glow that seemed to emanate from him, a soft, radiant light that shimmered over his skin as though the spirits themselves blessed him. "The child, he is," Okori whispered, words failing him as O replaced fear. Nwanyuoma held the boy close, tears streaming down her cheeks, sweat mingling with tears, her exhaustion total yet meaningless in the face of this miracle. "He is safe. He is our son. The spirits have protected him," she murmured, rocking him gently. "He carries destiny in him. I can feel it. The world, the household, everything will change because of him." Adogo's eyes narrowed, a cold, creeping fear settling into her chest. She glanced at her daughters, the twin girls who had once been the center of attention, the ones who had drawn the father's love so easily. But now, as the boy's radiant presence filled the hut, something strange began to happen. The girls stirred, their faces pale, their energy waning. A cough here, a shiver there. The spark that had once made them lively and adored seemed to dim under the weight of unseen forces. Why them?" Adogo whispered, panic rising, though her voice was tight with disbelief. "Why does the gods' favor shine on her, on him, and not them?" The villagers, who had gathered silently outside, began to murmur among themselves. the air thick with awe and fear. The spirits have chosen the son, one whispered. The first wife, the mother, has been honored, and yet, the daughters, they fall into shadow. The balance is shifting. Mornu Oma, cradling her newborn, whispered softly, almost to the child. You are blessed, and you are chosen. The gods have walked with you even before your first breath. Your path, your destiny, will be guided by their will. Okori bowed his head, humbled and silent, feeling the full weight of the household's transformation. Rage, envy, pride, all those emotions in Adorgo's heart seemed powerless in the presence of what had been. Rot. The boy glowed softly in Wanuoma's arms, a quiet light that illuminated the room, the faces of those present, and the knowledge that the gods' favor had chosen unmistakably. Adorgo's daughters lay pale and quiet, their usual laughter gone, their energy fading, as though the unseen hand of justice, divine and unrelenting, had claimed its measure. She could feel it in her bones, the undeniable shift in power, the reversal of fortune, and the terrifying awareness that no amount of jealousy or manipulation could challenge what the gods had willed. The hut was silent but for the soft breaths of Mornu Oma, the newborn, and the fading, trembling breaths of Adorgo's daughters. The world had tilted subtly, yet irrevocably. Judgment had been rendered. The household would never again know the balance it had once held. And in the quiet glow of the newborn son, in the waning energy of the daughters, and the hushed awe of all who watched, one truth was undeniable. The first wife had delivered safely. The gods had intervened, and the forces that favored courage, humility, and truth had spoken loudly and without mercy. The child's faint, radiant glow seemed to whisper of a future that none could ignore, a destiny that would shake the household and mark the beginning of a new era. The second wife, once proud and unchallenged, now trembled before what she could neither control nor comprehend. The son had been born, the judgment had begun, and the gods had chosen their side.